Hi, I'm Morgan Killick, and in this short video for the Sega program, I'm going to be talking about legal structures for social enterprise. A quick caveat at first, I'm not a qualified lawyer, so please don't take what I'm about to say as legal advice. That said, I am a business consultant with a specialism in social enterprise, and I've provided guidance on this topic for many years, helping hundreds of founders like you to understand the options and select a preferred one for your new social enterprise venture. I also need to say right at the start that incorporating a social enterprise is a serious business. You should always talk through the details of your personal circumstances with a suitably qualified professional on a one-to-one basis before you incorporate. Now, hopefully by now you'll have seen our other videos which explain what a social enterprise is and isn't. You should be broadly ready to engage with the topic of what form of social enterprise is best for you, and will know that social enterprise is not a legally restricted term in any way. Anyone or any legal entity can claim to be a social enterprise and freely use the term. There's nothing in law to stop them. So social enterprise is really an umbrella term for a number of different organizational structures that share common traits. And this is precisely why many people find it hard to choose the one for them. The names of these structures are similar and the jargon can be confusing. I'm putting up a slide right now that's going to show you what some of these options are. First thing you'll notice here is there is rather a lot of them. They all sound quite similar. They have similar names and similar acronyms. Now you also notice if you just zoom in one moment here on the CIC that there are several different subtypes of this model as well. And you can see on this diagram that I've tried to plot these on two different axes. So we have increasing complexity of adopting and governance going from left to right, and increasing scalability of your chosen trading activities going up here. And then we've plotted these relative to those two axes. Now, I'm not trying to say that we should look at these right now. All I'm doing is putting this slide up so that you can refer to this in detail when you feel more able to engage with these options. The idea being, you can pause the video here, come back and have a look at this chart when you're sure which one you want to go for. The rest of the presentation is going to be helping you make that decision. Okay, so I'm going to move on very quickly from this. Don't worry about those terms yet, because we will look at them in detail later in this video. I think the most important thing is how are you going to choose from these different options? And in respect of this, there are some approaches that are generally a bad idea. These include Googling for an answer, which is almost guaranteed to lead you down a very confusing rabbit hole, or trying to read up on every single option that there is out there, which becomes a very open-ended task. And typically those that try and do this end up in some form of analysis paralysis, where they just can't decide. Now they know all of the ins and outs of everything. Some other bad ideas are just picking what seems like an easy option, or letting somebody else decide for you. Ultimately, this is a big decision and it's yours to take. You need to engage with some of the detail and understand what you're signing up to before taking that decision. So don't go for these approaches. So what does a better way look like? Well, I've recommended the process I'm about to outline for several years now, and it generally ends up with a positive result. So to start with, you need to learn what the key concepts actually mean, because all the decisions you take in terms of choosing between those many options you saw on the previous slide involve a thorough grasp of the jargon and terminology. It's vital you know what the implications of deciding one way or another actually are. So get to know the key concepts first. Once you've got that, it can be helpful to find out what organizations like yours that have already been established chose for their legal structure. You can do this by searching for them on Companies House or the Charity Commission in most cases, and you look at their articles of association or founding documents if they're on the public record. But some, of course, aren't. And in all cases, I'd advise talking to those organizations if possible, and maybe seeing what their logic was to choose the option they went for. Next, understand the main options. The vast majority of founders will choose one of a few main options. So for me, any decision starts with a closer look at these to see if one of them is right for you. If none are, then you're probably going to need some very specialist support to look at the less common structures. But provided that one or more of those main options is looking relatively good, the next stage is to talk through in detail with somebody who knows a bit more about them. And for the Sega program, either myself or one of my colleagues can perform this role. Whilst this is not legal advice, it should help you clarify your preferred option while significantly reducing the costs of a qualified lawyer. The final step in the process, I do have to say this, is to discuss your final decision with your accountant and a qualified lawyer before you incorporate. It is possible, of course, to incorporate without this. You can sort of do a DIY incorporation using the templates on Companies House or the Charity Commission, but this is really only advisable for those who have an absolutely thorough understanding of all of the implications. So in a nutshell, that's how to choose. Follow this method that I've outlined here under a better way, and you will find that things become easier than going for one of these routes that I've outlined above. So the next step, if you follow this better way, is to look at the key concepts, and that's what we're going to do next. The idea here is to give you some insight into why a knowledge of these is important, and crucially, it's your position in respect of these that is fundamental to that selection process. It's worth saying at the start here that if there's any uncertainty about what these concepts mean, even after listening to this, it's important to note that you are at that stage where you need those key concepts clarifying before you go on to engage with the detail of different legal structures. And that's where support from a program like Sega can come in as well. So first one I wanted to just unpick is this doctrine of limited liability. Limited liability means that the liability for the contracts, decisions, and other major legal obligations of the company lies with the company rather than the individuals who run it. Okay, and this is crucial because for very simple, straightforward social enterprises that are only just beginning to incorporate and aren't taking on major legal responsibilities, they may not need to incorporate at all. Okay, there are some options available without going on the public record and having a limited liability company. However, if you are taking on legal responsibilities, limited liability is highly, highly recommended. Secondly, the trading activities and business model of your venture is very important for you to understand what that business model is, how scalable it is, what kinds of trading activities you might want to undertake, not just now, but in future. Reason being, some of the legal structures restrict the type of trading you can do. So that's a fundamental concept to be sure of. Always choose and work out what kinds of business model you're likely to have before choosing a legal structure. Thirdly, eligibility for third sector grants. And I do say third sector grants specifically here because a lot of social enterprises may well get business grants, i.e. grants intended for general business anyway, but there are, of course, lots of grants available specifically for the third sector that charities and social enterprises are in a good position to get. But the devil can often be in the detail. Many third sector grant funders have eligibility criteria on legal structures they will and won't allow to apply for their grants. So if you foresee specific third sector grants that are fundamental to your social enterprise and its growth trajectory, it's worth checking out what their eligibility criteria is before you incorporate. There's a big debate between having social enterprises that are limited by shares and those that are limited by guarantee. Most will be limited by guarantee, but there are share capital social enterprises too. You will need to understand the difference in these concepts and choose a path that you're comfortable with as a result of that knowledge. So, for example, share capital social enterprises allow owners to extract profit and sell parts or all of the company to others. But going down that route significantly reduces your eligibility for third sector grants, and you may find that some organizations simply don't recognize you as a social enterprise. Limited by guarantee, on the other hand, you cannot sell parts of that company. You cannot extract profit in the form of a dividend. And that is the more common route for social enterprise legal structures. The board is a key concept as well, because the board are the ultimate decision makers in the organization. There are lots of questions about the board and its composition that you'll need to have an opinion on before you can adopt a legal structure. So some of these are listed below. So social enterprises will typically have a board with several members. So are you comfortable sharing your decision-making power with others in this way? And if you are, how are the board going to be chosen? Are they going to be comprised of just the founders, or will there be some form of election? If you have a mass membership type organization, it's common for the board to be elected annually or biannually or something of that nature. For small, tight social enterprises, often the founders are the initial board members. And also, are founders expecting to be on the board and to benefit financially from the social enterprise? If they are, then charitable type legal structures probably won't apply to you. And finally, just a point on flexibility and transparency, two other key concepts in terms of how you decide which legal structure to go down. Some structures are more flexible than others. What this means is you can change aspects of your social enterprise and tweak the rules to accommodate your particular preferences on how you govern the organization and what it does, what it is and isn't allowed to do. You might need some flexibility in your constitution to allow that to happen. More rigid structures that can't be changed as easily typically are benefiting from greater transparency, i.e., it's clear what they are because they haven't changed their rules from the model articles that they adopted, and therefore they can be recognized more easily and perhaps subject to, for example, a regulator. So there's some of the key concepts, and if it comes to just choosing one of the structures, you will have to have a position on some of these things in order to whittle down your choices to your preferred structure. Okay, moving on. We're now going to have a look at the main options. So this is a little bit more detail now, and this is the final slide of the video. Just to reiterate, this is not an exhaustive analysis of every single feature, every pro and every con of every single option that is available to you. The idea here is that you can see from this whether perhaps one or two of these most frequently adopted forms of social enterprise look like they're going to suit you. And you're then going to go on to discuss the details of your personal circumstances with myself or a Sega colleague to help firm up which is your preferred route. And even after you have a preferred route, you should formalize that decision only with advice from a legal or financial advisor. So with that said, the main options in terms of having personal liability instead of limited liability. These are the simplest options, but they do not have that limited liability that I spoke about on the previous slide. You could just be a sole trader. A sole trader is very easy to become. You just register with HMRC. And you have very simple accounts that you can prepare yourself and report yourself to HMRC. There is no board in a sole trader, and that doesn't mean you can't have other advisors, but they have no formal role and there is no requirement to have any kind of committee or board. The problem with it is it's not widely acknowledged as a social enterprise because of some of those reasons. For example, it doesn't have a board, and it's unlikely to have an asset lock, and other aspects of what people believe a social enterprise should be, those common traits we spoke about at the start. That said, some funders will still back you even as a sole trader with small grants. And often this is the route that somebody just taking their very first steps in social enterprise might want to go down for that early trading activity, potentially backed with some of those small grants where sole trader is eligible. We also have, with no limited liability, so it's every individual involved has personal liability for these things, an option called the unincorporated voluntary association, or UVA. Under this option, it is also, like sole trader, relatively easy to adopt. You simply sign an agreement between the parties that will form the committee of the UVA. There are simple accounts that don't need to be filed on the public record, and you are governed by a committee rather than a board. And the distinction is quite important, because these are not these people do not go on the public record because they do not have limited liability. They are personally liable, but they typically form a committee, usually comprising of 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 people that will govern that organization on a voluntary basis. It's really designed for small non-profit groups that don't make a profit and are not intended to make a profit. Clubs, community organizations, that kind of thing. And yes, just a reminder, personal liability for debts and contracts. As soon as a UVA might enter a serious legal commitment, it's probably going to need to look at incorporating in some way. In other words, picking one of the other structures that I'm about to outline. So for individuals that need a very simple way of getting underway and can accept that they may not be acknowledged at this point as a social enterprise, a sole trader could be one of your options. For a group of people wanting to do some kind of non-profit type activity, maybe involving very simple trading, but where all of the profits will be, or all of the surpluses, rather, I should say, will be spent by the organization, a UVA might be for you. Moving on, we now have legal entities, proper legal structures that have that limited liability function. I'm going to start with the Charitable Incorporated Organization, CIO. Now, this one is really what we come to know as a registered charity. The term registered charity includes other types of legal entity, but if you're going to set up a charity now, this is the best route for you. But it's definitely the best option for a charity type organization, even if that charity is carrying out a limited amount of trading known as primary purpose trading that supports the goals of the charity. It enjoys tax breaks of various different kinds, but its social aims are strictly regulated by the Charity Commission. There is quite a lot of work to do to make sure that you're, in order to get this status of registered charity, your social aims and objects of the charity conform with the regulations. It will be governed by a board of trustees who do not benefit financially. And that's a key thing, I think, for founders who go about setting up a social enterprise thinking that they may benefit financially. Maybe a charity is not a thing for you, because this is one of the strict provisions around this. And also, your trading activities are restricted. I'm not going to go into lots of detail on this now, but you cannot freely trade in different goods and services as you see fit, and as the organization grows, there are rules and regulations around what you can and can't do. Next up, we have the company limited by guarantee. It's a very old legal structure, and it is the most flexible one for social enterprises. Flexibility meaning, as I mentioned on a previous slide, the ability to change exactly the rules that are adopted and what the organisation is there for. It's ideal for social enterprises who do need to incorporate and get that limited liability, but aren't quite sure of their business potential. It requires a lot of work on the standard articles that Companies House offer to turn it into a social enterprise. And things like the asset lock, which is a requirement of quite a few funders, doesn't exist in the standard model articles and needs to be added in by amending those articles. And there are other provisions as well within the standard model articles that would need adjusting to accommodate the needs of social enterprise funders. The board can be paid in this model, but all profits are reinvested in the company itself. Okay. That's a company limited by guarantee. And now we have the community interest company, which is a legal structure, or a set really of different legal structures that were brought about really to recognize this social enterprises found it difficult sometimes to adopt the company limited by guarantee. And for other reasons. They're specifically designed to support the need of social entrepreneurs. So it's ideal for social enterprises that do have a clear business model and want to be trading. It does involve a few things, such as submitting an annual report to the Killick regulator, as well as the standard accounts you would submit to HMRC. And it does contain that asset lock. Again, a thing that social enterprise funders often ask for. Well, it's already written into the constitution of a community interest company. It's relatively easy to adopt in that it doesn't need a lot of work on the model articles. The barrier being there are several different variants of community interest company. Now, there isn't time to go through all of these right now, but just as a heads up, the two principal routes within a community interest company are a community interest company limited by guarantee and a community interest company limited by shares. I'm going to quickly go through the main features of both of those now. So under the community interest company limited by guarantee, there's a minimum of one board member. A lot of funders and other bodies would like 3, but legally speaking, it's a minimum of 1. It commits to reinvesting its profit in the company instead of paying dividends to shareholders, of which there are none in this model. Board members can be paid a wage, and it is widely recognised by grant funders, typically if there are 3 or more people on the board. Lastly, the community interest company limited by shares. Again, minimum of 1 board member. And this one is different because it is based on share capital rather than guarantee. It can pay up to 35% of its profit as dividends to those shareholders, and those shares can be sold and exchanged. Board members can be paid a wage and potentially a dividend as well, of course, but it is typically ineligible for third sector grants. Those social enterprise or third sector grants that are designed for charities and social enterprises to apply for often don't like a share capital model, which this one is. Okay, so there we have the main options. The ones with a blue background involve no incorporation. There is no limited liability. They are simple, easy structures to get underway with. The ones with an orange background are the limited liability companies that will go on the public record and formalize your social enterprise. The idea here, not that we cover everything, but that you get a sense of which might be right, and then book in, see myself or a colleague from the Sega program to talk it through in more detail. So thank you very much for listening. I've been Morgan Killick, and good luck to you in your new social enterprise. Thank you.